My name is Dan Fenn. I want to welcome you to the latest edition of Lexington Remembers, and particularly to our special segment on World War II in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the conclusion of that conflict. I'm delighted to say that our guest today is Shirley Stolz. She and I have done some interviews before, and we're comrades on the Friends on the Council on Aging board and the 80-plus group that meets once a month and various other endeavors. Shirley was born in Lexington, and she was old enough so that she remembers the days from 39 to 45 of World War II. 1939, when the war started in Europe, and you were how old then?
Gosh, we decided I was 13.
13. Okay, so you were well aware of what was going on.
Oh, completely aware. I was kind of like ever since our family subscribed it to Life magazine, I was kind of like, that turned me on to history and to photography and to foreign affairs. And so I was very aware of what was going on nationally and internationally.
Yeah.
For my age, probably. I was more aware than some kids.
Yeah.
And I just happened to remember, I think it was September, am I right?
It was September.
And we were sitting on the porch at the Cape, sitting with my grandfather, and I guess we got the news over the radio that, that the Germans had started the war, so to speak. And well, like anything, you wonder, what's going to happen now?
Yes, exactly.
What's this mean? I'm pretty young, but I was saying to myself, and everybody else was saying, what does this mean?
Yeah. And what was Lexington like then? It was pretty different from now. The population
Lexington was a small town, really. It was rural, much more rural, of course, than now. And there were a lot of farms, as you and I both know, most of which are now gone. Just a very few left, like Wilson's, whatever. And most of the population, almost exclusively, was white. And most of the people were either Catholic or Protestant, and that was that. There were very few, there was almost no diversity to amount to a row of beans. But that was the way it was, and we never thought about any other way of life than the one that we had.
And the town was pretty much run not by the Irish Catholics, but by the
No, it was
Yankees.
run by a lot of people. Largely, they were people who lived in, I think, the Merriam Hill area.
Yeah.
I knew most of those people, and they were my father's friends for two reasons. Number one, I went to Hancock School, so I went to school with all of the sons and daughters of people who lived on Merriam Hill. And my father rode the train with a lot of the men who worked in Boston for the job. So that was one of the ways that people got to know each other. And as I said, even my boyfriend during World War, father was chairman of the Board of Selectmen.
Ah, okay.
To give you a little context there.
All right. And truck farms and greenhouses. Not much dairy anymore.
Well, as a kid, I wasn't as aware of what was going on. It was simply something that you saw. My mother didn't drive, and so I kind of was limited to the territory between Upper Mass Avenue and the town in and around the library and up Merriam Hill. And I never get to see a lot of the rest of the town because my mother didn't drive.
Yeah, okay. And
it sounds strange, but to be isolated in your own town.
I know.
But in a sort of a way I wasn't. I didn't get to know kids from East Lexington until I went to junior high school.
Okay, all right.
To give you some feeling about why wouldn't I know all this stuff? Well, because I just didn't go out there and see it.
Yeah, and East Lexington was really quite separate from the center of town, and
yes, it was
its own community.
Well, more so than now.
Yeah, yeah. And so what was the center of town like?
Well, it was Nirvana.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, one thing that happened was really important was Duran's opened with their ice cream
Oh,
store.
yeah,
That made our life
yeah,
very much
yeah,
more pleasant
yeah,
because everybody gathered at Duran's for ice cream.
yeah.
And the woman who ran it, Dorothy Day, I think her name was, or something like that, Dorothy Duran, it probably was, put up with us. I don't know why, but she did.
Oh, I know why.
Yeah, right.
You were.
And then, and then there were a lot of social life centered for adults and even for kids around the Belfry Club,
Oh, yes, which is long gone.
which is long gone. We did things like going to dancing school.
Yeah, yes, I remember
Terrible,
that.
terrible
Yeah,
experience.
yeah,
But at
yeah.
any rate,
So when the war started in '39, how did people in Lexington feel about it? Were they involved? Were they interested, or was it so
didn't
far
strike me.
away?
Of course, I was still only 13 then. It was
Yeah.
when I got a little bit more, when I was more adult, not 2 years later. I didn't have any sense that was terribly involved. It could have been just because I was only a kid and I wasn't involved in adult conversations. It certainly wasn't something that we talked about. I really don't know.
Was something a long way away,
Yeah.
and was there a sense that it was we were going to get involved, or was the sense that we shouldn't and wouldn't get involved?
Well, there was certainly a lot of discussion about whether or not the United States would get involved in the war in Europe.
Yeah,
And that was certainly very much under discussion. And there are those who wanted to get involved and those who were called isolationists who wanted nothing at all to do with
yeah. Charles
with war.
Lindbergh and so that crowd, at my recollection, because I didn't it wasn't on active duty until '43. My recollection of '39, '40 was that there was a steady change from not wanting to get involved to thinking maybe we did have some responsibility here to come to the aid of the British, and because the French were conquered by that time.
I think what changed for me is I was sent off to private school in Northampton, Massachusetts. It was a school that was owned and run by two ladies, one of whom was my aunt, Sarah, and it was deemed appropriate that I go to Aunt Sarah's school. So this was Northampton School in Northampton, Massachusetts. And it was there that I became much more aware of the war because Aunt Sarah was very much involved with the community there and with Smith College. And so we were doing things like we were knitting for Britain.
Oh, okay.
And we were, that was, of course, it was a little bit later, but we were very much aware. And what happened that particularly impacted my life was that many people not many, but a few people, particularly at Oxford in England, sent their children over to the United States to keep them safe from the bombs. And at my school, we took in about 8 people from Britain, and one of them was my roommate senior year. Her father was a Don at Oxford. And so, I mean, the internationalness of it really brought home to you when you were talking to people who were evacuated because their families, what it was a relationship between Smith College and Oxford, I believe. And then the upshot of it was they needed someplace for the kids to go to school, and my aunt apparently offered places to some of these kids, and that was how I got to know some of these young ladies from Great Britain.
So that brought you into the war in a sense, in a way that most people didn't have.
Right.
And what was going on in Lexington about the war before Pearl Harbor? Much of anything?
Not much of anything. I mean, the thing is, I wasn't there to be watching
Yeah,
it so
right.
much, really. That
Right.
causes a problem for you, because if
Yeah.
you're trying to find out what's happening in Lexington and I'm
Yeah.
not there.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I entered Harvard College in 1940, and the question of whether we should get involved in the war was a very, very controversial question, and there were protests and marches and signs and a lot of antagonism toward President Conant, the president of Harvard at the time, who was an interventionist. And
Really?
a lot of people felt that he was very wrong and opposed his position on it. So then 1941, December 1941, Sunday afternoon.
I can remember it well.
Boy, me too, the middle of the Philharmonic concert.
Is that what it was for you?
Yeah.
I would be a junior at Northampton, and I came downstairs to have supper. And somehow or other, the news was out, and that was they told us. And I can see the whole room. I can just see the picture right this minute.
Yeah.
What it looked like. I thought, oh my goodness, that's just exactly what we've all been worrying about.
Yeah.
It's interesting to consider that, Pearl Harbor. My husband, when I met him, which was of course many years later, only escaped Pearl Harbor by one day.
Oh.
He was on a light cruiser, and he and probably a whole convoy. They were doing convoys. We were very aware of ships being sunk, and they were convoying stuff from Pearl Harbor to Manila.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so he was one day out when they had just left.
And so he was in the Navy.
He was in the Navy, because I hadn't met him. I hadn't met him until after the war, but that's another story.
Yeah.
We're talking about the war right now. I mean,
Yeah.
the war in 1941. So that did it, and of course after that, life completely changed, and people began. We really took the war seriously as a country. And people were being drafted. I don't know when the draft precisely started. You may remember that better than I.
Before Pearl Harbor.
I mean, the boys were beginning to disappear into the service. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe they did it. I don't know if they did it backwards or not, but by the time they were through, they were drafting 18-year-olds.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And so that summer, you were back in Lexington after school was over.
Well, summertime, that summer got ruined by having my appendix out.
Oh.
What was sort of interesting about that was it plays into gas rationing. Rationing came into play. Mm-hmm. And we were at the summer house in Cape Cod, and I came down with appendicitis overnight. And we used up the gas ration for practically the summer, getting me to Mass General Hospital to have my appendix out.
Okay.
It ruined
Used
the summer.
up all the gas. Yeah. So what else was rationed? There was gas
Everything
ration.
was rationed by the time they were through. The order of rationing was sort of a little bit out of my head. When did they do what? But certainly gasoline was rationed, sugar was rationed, butter was rationed. Oleo came into play, and you had this white thing of stuff that came, and you had a yellow thing that was in the middle that you were sort of supposed to squeeze to make it look like butter.
I remember.
Nylon stockings disappeared.
Yeah.
All kinds of things disappeared. In a funny kind of a way, it was healthy. Mm-hmm. We had to walk everywhere, and we didn't have all the food that's bad for you. Meat disappeared. Mm-hmm. So...
Mm-hmm. And people disappeared. A lot of people from Lexington were in the service. What, over 50, I think.
Oh, many, many more than that. Those are just the people that got killed.
Okay. Okay.
Everybody was. I mean,
Well, exactly.
just to put it in another, I just was thinking, how was it? This is another story a little bit later on in my life during the war. I spent one of my summers when I was at college studying marine biology, invertebrates actually, at Woods Hole at a marine biological lab. In our class of 55 people, there were 4 men. One was a priest.
Yeah.
One was a super precocious 16-year-old boy. One was a kid who'd had polio and was turned down for the service. And the 4th one was a young man who was too tall. He was 6'10", so he was considered what they called 4F, which meant that you were not eligible for the service. So that gives you an idea of how many people were around. They weren't.
Yeah.
There just weren't any men unless they were in service and home on leave.
Yeah.
And the one incident one of the summers that I was in Lexington, sort of an interesting side story. There were Navy fellows who were stationed in Lexington.
Oh.
Which is something that you would never think of Lexington.
No.
For reasons I have no idea why, they decided that they would have a little Navy unit training in the use of anti-aircraft guns. Mm-hmm. And there were 50 guys that were stationed in Lexington for a while, and they apparently went through a 6 weeks training. And since there were no places for them to stay, particularly, people volunteered. And one of our neighbors volunteered to house these fellows from the Navy. Mm-hmm. And also, there was a young man, and my goodness, there weren't any of those around. And so, somehow or other, we were introduced, and we spent some of his free time together just talking, and today the kids would say hanging out.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I went back to school. He went off to his Navy job, and I never heard from him again. Mm-hmm. But he was a really nice young fellow from New Jersey, and his name was Eddie Gerhardt. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there was one of my experiences with men during the war.
Yeah.
Rather limited.
Now, we didn't have any aircraft guns in Lexington.
No, not that I know of.
I think on the top of Belmont Hill, where that
Really?
PT thing is now. I think there were guns up there for a while. So where were these people training in Lexington?
They were at the Knights of Columbus Hall is what I read. Really? I read it in Colin's book. Yeah. That's where they were stationed. I really wasn't paying any attention to where they were stationed, only where they were living.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting that people know about or don't know about was it was an airplane spotting station on the top of the hill behind me, which is it now belongs to the Bertucci's, and they've turned this area into conservation land. But at that time, it was all woods all the way through from my house on Mass Avenue all the way through to Lexington Golf Club, and it was all kind of wild. But there were paths all the way through it because people used the land a lot just to walk on. Mm-hmm. And so on the top of what we called Sunset Rock, they built a lookout tower. Mm-hmm. And this was manned 24 hours a day.
By volunteers?
By volunteers.
Yeah.
And they had airplane spotting charts around the room. I don't believe that I ever saw it, but I know exactly where it was.
Yeah. And did they have, as they did in Cambridge, I know my parents were air raid wardens, and you had places to go in case there was a raid. You had people who would warn you if there was a raid.
Theoretically, a siren went off and you were supposed to all go to shelter. And the question was, shelter seemed to me kind of a little bit of foolishness, but when I was in school, we used to go down in the basement and just sit there.
of the school.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It wasn't an air raid shelter of any sort at all.
But in Lexington, where were you supposed to go?
I don't think we went anywhere.
Yeah, I see.
I didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I
That's
see.
for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Good question, but I never went anywhere.
So there were volunteer airplane spotters and also air raid wardens.
Yes, I'm sure there were a lot of the men were air raid wardens.
Yeah,
My father was not. I think maybe he'd had enough war.
yeah.
Being in World
once
War
enough.
One, he'd had enough.
Yeah,
Just
I
the sound
don't
of a
think
siren
that-
used to set him off, actually.
yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because of
World War One, when he was an ambulance driver,
Yeah,
and the sound of the siren meant he had to go out on a trip.
yeah. And so there was this pretty widespread participation on the home front.
Oh yeah, one of the things that I do think was a little bit of a unique experience for me was the fact that at our school we went out and worked in the fields because the men had disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And one fall we picked potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
The machines came and dug up the potatoes, but we went around afterwards and picked up the potatoes and bagged them for this farmer that my aunt knew. And then the following spring, we went out and picked asparagus.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to be pretty good at picking asparagus.
Yeah.
And then the following fall after that, we picked apples. And we also pruned apple trees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, I just was reading that the other day. I found a little piece from my school days. And we were not paid for picking potatoes because the guy offered to pay us and we said no, we weren't interested. But after that, the powers that be got after us and they insisted we should be paid because we were unfair competition.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see.
But the
Okay.
truth be that the Department of Agriculture, Massachusetts, gave the school some sort of commendation for helping to save the agricultural crops in the Pioneer Valley.
Yeah. Wow. That's all right. And
And out of all this, I think I made $25, and I put it into a war savings bond.
yes, exactly, with the Concord
Patriotic thing to
statue
do.
on it. Yeah, yeah. I think I still have some of those.
Really, you should turn them in.
Yeah.
They're probably worth $37.50 now.
Well, I would think almost, yeah. Victory gardens around town?
Yeah, that's the other thing that was true in my life. My father was a frustrated farmer. He went to Cornell Agricultural School and discovered that he could make more money in insurance than he ever could as a farmer. So he ended out in the insurance business. But that didn't stop him from having a garden. So we had a really giant vegetable garden, and he canned stuff right and left. I remember particularly tomatoes and green beans. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like my job to go out and pick in the garden. I wasn't allowed to do anything, not even weeding, because he did all of that. But I was allowed to go out and pick all the vegetables for dinner every night. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we had some chickens. We had about 6 of them, so that put us in eggs. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is he had asparagus bed. And what else did we do? Oh, we had a pig.
Uh-huh.
We didn't keep the pig. The pig was kept on one of the farms at the top of the hill.
I see.
But when the time came, then we got the pig slaughtered, and then we had meat because my father bought a big freezer.
Uh-huh.
So that was the Victor garden. He had just about every vegetable that you can name in the garden.
And did a lot of people have gardens?
I
and
believe that a
chickens?
lot of people did. I have
Yeah.
a funny feeling that a lot of his friends were not gardeners and never had one. But I believe that a lot of other people did.
Yeah.
And as you know, it was a farming community already.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So there wasn't
Had
as
been
much
since the beginning.
necessity for you personally to have a victory garden, well, there were plenty of them. Mm-hmm. And I think that Carla Fortman is doing a research project on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that'll be
Yeah, I think she's
interesting.
putting out a brochure on that. I've been in touch with her, so I really don't know the details. But
Oh, on the Victory Gardens.
On
and
Victory
the
Gardens in Lexington
home
during World
gardens
War.
during the war.
Yeah.
And what about sock knitting and that kind of stuff? For
As you said, nylon stockings disappeared
yeah,
completely. They were needed for the war. I don't know what. Oh, they put. I don't know what they did. Something special with them. I can't remember what it was. But at any rate, disappeared. So what all the girls did was we were supposed to get dressed up for dinner. So we put makeup on our legs. And I never did, but some people drew lines up the back to
Yeah.
duplicate the look and feel of
Yeah.
nylon stockings.
yeah,
But, and the other thing that happened was, not that it made any difference, but blue jeans became more popular than they probably had been. It was always a Western thing, but they sort of moved east. And so at college we were wearing blue jeans. And I remember a friend of mine at college at Vassar had a sister at Wellesley. And for reasons unknown, Wellesley College looked down upon having blue jeans.
Oh, really?
So she was campused for
funny.
a month or something or other for wearing blue jeans.
That's funny. That's funny. And were the care packages that Lexington people sent?
Oh, yeah, that was something that people did. I didn't personally do very much of that because I didn't have the resources to put one together. But I mean, I'm sure there were, the Red Cross, I'm sure, did a lot of stuff like packaging bandages. In fact, there was the Red Cross headquarters was in the house that Don McKenna lives in now, that was known as the Garrity House, and the Barnes property with the Garrity House, and then it became the Red Cross headquarters during World War II, rather. And all the good people in Lexington were involved in whatever they could do for the Red Cross.
Were there any people, individuals, who continued to be against the war and not participating in all these things? Do you remember any?
Personally, not that I knew of. I'm sure there were people who were, but truthfully, they went underground if they were. They just wasn't a very popular thing to be.
I guess.
I have no idea, but not anyone that I knew was against the war by the time we got in.
By the time Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor definitely did it.
Yeah. That's interesting that you had then on the home front the same kind of mobilization that you had for people in the service only.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Each person was doing what they could personally do. So I said, I think I did more real serious war work when I was at Northampton than I did when I was in college. Perhaps because when I was in college, I was very interested in getting through. I went through Vassar College in 3 years.
Wow.
Which was, everyone did. My whole class went through.
Oh, really?
It was an accelerated program where we went 2 15-week terms and a 10-week term. So we went from September 1 to June 30th. So it didn't leave a lot of summer to be other places. But and we were terribly busy because we were all concentrating on getting our education so we could out. I had every plan, if the war continued, to join the Waves. I couldn't wait to get out to go join the Waves. But I wanted to be an officer, so I wanted a college education. And of course, a lot of the boys were trained at places like Yale in what they call the V12 program.
Yes.
I don't know, you may know more about that than I do.
No, I just remembered there was a V12 program, and I would have liked to have been in that, but my eyes had gone bad, so that wasn't
a lot had to do with timing.
What happened to those guys?
Well, they came out as ensigns.
I see.
It seemed to me most of them were Navy. I'm sure there were Army people too, but I just remember Navy, and they would come out as ensigns.
Yeah, it was an officers training
Yeah,
program.
it was.
Yeah, I remember there was one at Harvard. I've forgotten how long the program was.
And then
but-
the huge program for officer training of women at Smith College.
oh, really?
They had the waves were there, and that's how I got interested in being a wave, because they would parade on the parade ground at Smith College, on the flat place on the playing fields, and Northampton School had a good relationship with Smith College. We used to use their pool for athletics, and we went over there for vespers on Sunday, and occasionally to concerts. And so, and again, as I said, there was this relationship with the youngsters from Great Britain and the professors at
right.
Smith.
Right.
But I was planning to be a wave, definitely.
Yeah.
I always liked the water, so I was going to be a wave.
Yeah.
That was women's, something really.
I can't remember.
It was something really, it wasn't automatic, whatever is volunteer
Yeah.
services.
yeah.
It was something ridiculous to make, trying to make it work.
To
on.
make- to make-
And then the president of Wellesley College was head of the Waves. Her name was Mildred McAfee.
Oh, I remember her. Yeah.
And
That's right. That's right.
and so and they kept promoting her from some lowly thing until she was finally up there in the Navy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
And what did the waves actually do?
they took the place of men largely in things like secretarial duties. I think some of them probably did some coding, things like that. It depended on your particular talent. One of my teachers at school, at Northampton School, went into the women's, the Army version of it, which is
Yeah.
called WAC, W-A-C.
Right.
And she ended up teaching illiterate soldiers how to read in Texas.
Really?
So that gives you an idea of one example that I'm familiar with.
Now, were the waves, did they serve on warships or just at
I believe
shipper-
that none of them, I don't, possibly by the end of the war, I'm not certain of that, but I think almost always they were replacing men so they could go from shore duty to active duty on a ship.
Yeah, yeah. Now, my impression from talking to my parents who were living in Cambridge at the time was that and from talking to you, was that there was a widespread volunteer involvement in wartime activities at home. That an awful lot of people were participating in one way or another. Is that?
Well, I think everybody was preoccupied with whatever they were physically able to do.
Yeah,
As I said, my mother didn't drive. That limited her activities considerably.
yeah,
And as my father was busy in his garden, I mean, he worked 5.5 days a week.
yeah,
And he did play golf on weekends, I have to admit.
Yeah.
That's what he really liked to do.
yeah,
But he was busy with his garden, and you just did what you could do. I think as the war wore on and it got a little bit better, we took the seriousness of doing it was sort of settled out. Everybody had their place and they were doing their thing, whatever it might be. And people didn't have to go search for whatever they were doing. They'd already decided what they were
Yeah.
doing, and that was
Yeah.
settled out.
yeah,
If you folded bandages, you went on folding bandages. You kept on doing what you were already doing.
yeah, yeah. One can romanticize these things, particularly looking back 75 years, but it seems to me the evidence is pretty clear that this was not like today's wars. No draft, fought by volunteers, pretty separate from the activities at home. That this really was a national enterprise. That
There's a tremendous national commitment to that war.
right,
it seemed that everyone was on the same page. I'm sure there were people who weren't, but I certainly, as we said before, they never spoke up at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
The attack on Pearl Harbor united people.
Yeah.
People who were uncertain before about whether we should or we shouldn't be involved. That was another matter when it was our own country that was being bombed.
Yeah.
It was almost like overnight that there was no dissension after that.
There were a few days after Pearl Harbor when some of the isolationists were saying, okay, well, obviously we have to go to war with the Japanese, but we don't have to get into the European thing. And then Hitler declared war on us.
Oh, that was the other thing that happened, yeah.
That wrapped that question up.
Right.
Yeah. And that gradual change from a country that was isolationist to when the war began in Europe in September 39 until Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt was having a tough time.
Oh, indeed, he was.
Getting support.
With his friends with Churchill.
Lend-Lease and all that stuff.
The other thing was shipping, which is, we haven't touched on that much, but we were losing shipping right and left. And I think the British thought we were kind of stupid because for a while we didn't send ships out in convoys. We just sent them out. And stuff that we were sending to Great Britain for their war effort was getting bombed by the German submarines who were extremely active.
Yeah.
In fact,
I think
it would be interesting to know how close were they, how often, and where, because they were definitely off our coast on Cape Cod, no question about it.
Oh, yeah.
How close they were.
Landed some people, actually.
Theoretically, yeah.
And they got into the Piscataqua up in Portsmouth at the Portsmouth Naval Base. They got up the river. They knew when the screen was raised or lowered for our subs to go through, and they went through too. It was
They were bold.
Yeah, yeah. And then
and I believe they may have landed people ashore. The whole idea would be to land saboteurs ashore. Speaking of
not many, but they did. And
speaking of that, reminds me of one other experience I had at college, which was a little bit different in that after the war was over, I was in my third term, senior year. That would be a 10-week term. This woman named, we called her Miki Bhala, came into our lives, and we didn't know much about her, but she joined one of my classes. And it turned out that she had been a partisan in Europe, in Slovakia, and that she was had led a bunch of OSS our people out of that area through the mountains in the wintertime. She was a school teacher who had facility in 5 languages, so she was very valuable. She became a partisan. She was 5 years older than I. She became a partisan, and she came to the attention of General Donovan. It was known as Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS, who was full of tricks and ideas and schemes and whatever. A really fascinating fellow.
Forerunner of the CIA.
But at any rate, he arranged for her to come over to this country and become, well, ultimately she became a citizen. I just found a piece about her the other day when I was rummaging around the web. And what was interesting is that he arranged for her to come to Vassar College, of all places, and she was in one of my classes, it was American literature. I remember working with her on Robert Frost.
Oh, really?
Helping with her English was very, very good.
Yeah.
As I said, she was fluent in 5 languages. She's a very intelligent woman. And I discovered just, I think it was last Sunday, there's a book about her.
Uh-huh.
She went on, became a United States citizen, and ended up selling real estate in California.
Really? No kidding.
But it was quite an experience. I mean, we were, oh, yeah. And then she was decorated at West Point. And so we all went down to see her receive a Bronze Star or something, or whatever it was, a bronze something or other. And I have it's not a very good picture, a picture of her standing there.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was really an experience with all the whole cadet corps out there with this one little Slovakian person.
Yeah.
She was a really nice person.
Well, between that kind of experience and the kids from Great Britain over here, and of course, you know, out at Columbia Point, where the Kennedy Library now stands, there was an Italian prisoner of war camp.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So people were brought over here and came over here. So it became more and more of an intimate American experience, and all the letters from the GIs going back and forth. Nothing really but V-mail. You couldn't call. Obviously, you couldn't email. You couldn't, there was virtually no communication between the GIs and their homes except V-mail.
That's right.
It took
you didn't
2
know
weeks.
what was going on very much of the time.
No.
And if you were writing, say you were writing to me, you couldn't say anything about what we were doing.
Well, that's true, or exactly.
And if it did, the
where
censors
you were.
would get it before you did.
Yeah, you could. They knew. My parents knew that I was in southern Italy, but they didn't know where, or what the circumstances were.
And also, the mail was very slow.
Very
and
slow.
Depending on whether you were in the Navy or the Army or the Coast Guard or whatever, mail had a trouble finding you.
Yep.
Because you were on the
that's true.
move.
Yep, that's true. That's true. Mail
But of course, I mean,
call was
communication
pretty
in
neat.
general, I mean, compared to communications today, everything was much more difficult.
Well,
you know, radios were, as we were saying, plugged in. Newspapers and magazines were a big source of information.
Yeah.
And when you got a telegram, that was generally not very good news. People just went up and spoke when somebody would say, "You've got a telegram."
Yeah.
I remember at college, you know, "You've got a telegram." Yeah, somebody's brother just died. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
It was pretty grim. We just sort of brushed it off because there's always something was going on that wasn't very pleasant.
Yep.
But
and what about you were at Vassar when it was over?
That's true.
That summer.
Actually, when it was over, it was when I was in Woods Hole, Marine Biological Lab.
Okay.
And Woods Hole community, as all communities in the United States, went totally wild.
Yeah.
It went berserk.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like it. Everyone was out on the street. And I have to say that I don't think anyone was sober.
Yeah.
I had one person in the whole place was sober. It was my roommate who didn't believe in booze. Not that I believed in it very much. But anyhow, I have to say that I was stinking drunk. I lost my shoes and I didn't find them for 2 days. And I went swimming at Nobska Beach in my pajamas, and I have no idea why. When did I put my pajamas on and then decide to go out again? I have no idea. And the next day, we went back into the lab. We were supposed to go back to school. And the thing is, we had take a bell jar and put a little octopus, I guess it was, in the bell jar and watch it change color. That's all I did all day was watch it change color.
Well, I hope it obliged.
I think it cured me for life on a hangover.
Yeah, I guess so.
But anyhow, it was a joyful experience. And I remember one of the girls that I was in school with there said, "Oh," she was married. She said, "Now I know what my husband was doing. He'd been working on the atomic bomb."
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He was in Los
Los
Alamos.
Alamos, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, secrecy was of course, a very censorship and secrecy were part of it all, really.
Yeah, yeah. I remember that very well.
For Pearl
Actually,
Harbor, oh, we see what
overseas,
relief.
I remember when the Germans surrendered, and actually our base was pretty quiet. I mean, we were greatly relieved, and thank God it's finally over.
But it really wasn't over.
But we still had the Japanese thing, and then when the Truman dropped the 2 bombs, and then the Japanese surrendered. But it was more a sense of relief, and now we can finally go home. I don't remember any great
Jubilation?
Yeah, right.
Where were you then, Don?
I was in
Actually, physically?
southern Italy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. South.
Because the war in Italy was over at that point.
Oh yeah, It wasn't over when we got there, but it was shortly thereafter. The bomb group. Well, listen, this has been terrific.
Well, I still got plenty to go.
Yeah.
You say something for the future.
Yeah.
But it was a strange time. It really was a strange time.
Yeah, it's
a very focused time, I might add.
Yeah, encapsulated time.
It was.
It
was intense. The whole time was
yeah,
intense.
Yeah. And I don't, at some fundamental level, I think we all assumed we were going to win.
Yeah, we always assumed that we could win.
Yeah.
I don't know, sometimes you wondered why you were thinking that.
Yes. Yeah, and there were bad days.
Of course, the thing,
good days,
the landing in Normandy, that was the thing that changed it.
Yep.
The perception that it was impossible for us to win.
Yeah. But at the same time, you weren't absolutely sure.
No.
And you couldn't be sure, and so there was always that uncertainty.
Of course, we on the Homefront here, we were spared all the agony that the Europeans and all the other people had to endure with bombing.
Yeah, I mean, just
you saw the pictures, and you'd go to the movies. Was the one place where you could see see it visually.
Yeah.
The Pathé News at the beginning of a movie.
Yeah. It was the movies and, as you say, the newspapers and magazines and radio. That was how we all found out what was going on. Well, thank God we haven't had another one of those.
We're not for that.
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot, Shirley. It was
You're
wonderful.
welcome. It's fun talking to you.
filling in that part of the story.